The Sonoran Desert of central Arizona is home to a modern-day metropolis, Phoenix. But today's Phoenix would not be possible without the advanced canals built by prehistoric people known as the Huhugum.
The canal systems were the greatest technological success story of our people. So that word Huhugum is the word that we use for our deceased. So that word Huhugum just means those that are gone. Archaeologists took that name and turned it into what we know today as a Hohugum. The name that we call ourselves is the Otham, and so those Huhugum would have been ancestral Otham. And so we contend that we're the same people, and we've always been here.
It is believed that the Huhugum lived in the Salt River and Gila River Valley from 200 BC to 1450 AD, but ongoing discoveries continue to expand that time frame even earlier.
So it doesn't matter if it was 1,000 years ago, 8,000 years ago, or present day, we are still the Otham, and that we've always been here. We've never left. But along that canal system, our people were able to channel the water, widen the water when they needed to make it speed up, and so they can actually get it to higher elevations. But at its height, or its peak, there was over 1,000 miles of canals, if you can believe it or not. And this map shows some of that. And I think even after this map, there was more discoveries to show more canal systems. They channeled this water and created an agricultural empire that wasn't rivaled anywhere else in the Southwest.
At its peak, there were at least 250,000 ancestral Otham living in the valley. By the 1400s AD, the ancestral Otham abandoned their villages in the Salt River Valley.
The late 1850s, a man named Jack Swilling was traveling west across the country to work as a teamster and had come across the valley. He recognized the significance and the value of the canal system that was already in place, and he, along with other miners that were in the area, had sought financial backing from Wickenburg businessmen and created a method to enhance and expand the canals that already exist here.
Inspired by the abandoned canals of the Otham, Jack Swilling was able to recultivate the land and reinvigorate an agricultural boom. This established Salt River Valley once again as a thriving agricultural community positioned squarely between Prescott and Tucson.
And when it comes to the name of the city that we have, that credit goes to Darrell Dupa, who was another one of our early pioneers in the city and also actually named the city of Tempe. So one of the early pioneers that we had in the city that probably has left the most visible mark is our town surveyor, who was William Hancock. And he, after the city's bounds were established as we know them today, he surveyed the downtown area and designated Washington Street as a main street, which it still is today.
Well, prior to Phoenix becoming the capital of Arizona, we were a small agricultural town. And because Phoenix was awarded the capital of the entire territory of Arizona, all eyes were now on Phoenix. So that brought in a lot of industry, brought some railroad attention. A lot of important decisions were made in this room that we're in right now. People were coming to this room before we were in a state. We were still a territory.
Before the territory of Arizona was created in 1863, the area was known as the New Mexico Territory, as established by the Confederacy. The post-Civil War federal government split the territory into the territory of Arizona and New Mexico along a north-south line. Prescott became the first capital in 1864.
This city was built on the infrastructure of agriculture from 2,000 years ago. And I don't know how many cities can say that.
The rich soil in the Salt River area was cultivated over several thousand years by the ancestral O'odham and the canals they built. The city we now know as Phoenix rose from this land.
I think it would be fair to say that Phoenix probably wouldn't even exist had it not been for agriculture.
In 1867, while the land now known as Phoenix was being cultivated into farmland, the capital of Arizona was moved from Prescott to Tucson. Still just an agricultural investment, Phoenix eventually became an official town in 1870. As the state of Arizona continued to grow, political power shifted once again, and the capital was moved back to Prescott in 1877.
Anybody who knows anything about Prescott is there's that famous Whiskey Row by the courthouse. This street right here, Washington Street, used to be Phoenix's Whiskey Row. The north side of the street had 16 saloons, a brewery.
Recognizing the growth of the area, in 1881, the territorial legislature passed the Phoenix Charter Bill, officially incorporating Phoenix as a city, with a population of around 2,500.
So after Phoenix was incorporated in 1881, this allowed the city of Phoenix to elect their own officials, create their own laws, things of that nature.
While Judge John T. Alsop became Phoenix's first mayor, many other notable figures emerged from this time period.
One of the most important figures to Phoenix, in my opinion, during that time period was a man by the name of Enrique Henry Garfias. This man was the first elected Mexican official in Phoenix when Phoenix was very much a segregated town, and he was a very brave man and he was a very reliable man.
As the Phoenix agriculture community prospered, the introduction of electricity made its way into Phoenix and began modernizing the way its citizens lived.
Well, electricity probably really set Phoenix in motion towards its own industrial age. Prior to that, it was a lot of gas lamps, dirt streets, things like that. A lot of the old West feel that you think. And once Phoenix got electricity, then it brought in things like trolley cars and industry like ice packing plants and things like that. The first street trolley car system was started by a man by the name of Moses Sherman. It was very important to Phoenix because this was a public mode of transportation, which was showing that Phoenix was growing up and needed this technological advancement.
Technological advancements also included railroad lines that positioned Phoenix as a connecting point in central Arizona.
All the farmers now had ways to export all of their product, and we were able to bring in new construction projects and materials and things like that. So Phoenix didn't have to rely on adobe and things like that. Now we could bring in a lot of like the bricks and wood, and it was very, very important to Phoenix.
Prescott and Tucson continued to negotiate for the right to be the territory of Arizona's capital. But in 1889, Phoenix's favorable location between Prescott and Tucson, as well as its railroad connections and prosperous agricultural industry, made it an easy choice as the fourth and final spot for the capital of Arizona.
Before the construction of the Roosevelt Dam, Arizona experienced a series of dry spells, often lasting for 5 or more years. All of this made the Southwest pretty unlivable.
Despite the formidable challenges of establishing an agricultural empire in the southwestern desert, Phoenix would enjoy great advancements in the areas of industry, transportation, education, and philanthropy that would set the stage for its transition into a monumental 20th century. But first, they had to deal with the drought.
These droughts ended up threatening the livelihoods of people that lived in the area, especially their agriculture and their livestock. This all changed in 1906 with the construction of the Roosevelt Dam.
In 1903, the Roosevelt Dam was authorized as the first major irrigation project under the brand new United States Reclamation Service. This new federal department was designed to help in the settlement of the Desert West. When completed, the Roosevelt Dam was the largest masonry dam in the world and a showpiece for the new agency. But being 60 miles away from the nearest railhead in the desert posed some unique challenges.
People such as crews that were working on the reservoir also had to constantly bring fuel to the area. So at that time, Arthur Powell Davis, who later became the director of the U.S. Reclamation Service, had this brilliant idea to create a temporary hydropower plant at the Roosevelt Dam. And by 1909, that temporary plant turned into the permanent site of the Roosevelt Power Plant. It was the Roosevelt Dam that helped us become this booming metropolis that we are today.
In 1887, Phoenix granted a business franchise to M.E. Collins and General Moses Sherman to develop mule and horse-drawn streetcars, primarily to boost Sherman's real estate business. The state's first public transit system soon began operating on the town's streets, eventually expanding for 33 miles.
The horse-drawn cars were then replaced in 1893 by electric cars, electric streetcars. And so this system was continued to be in use up until the 1940s when automobiles came around. The investment in our youth and the expansion of our schools has always been important because it secures the next generation of people. And it was as true then, 150 years ago, as it is today.
In 1871, 20 students filled a room in downtown Phoenix, and thus school was officially in session. There were 240 people living in Phoenix at the time. In 1873, an adobe schoolhouse was built.
From 1900 to 1919, 11 more schoolhouses were built, and those were the beginnings of the Phoenix Elementary School District. In the late 1800s, the federal government had a policy of assimilating Native Americans into Western European culture. And so with that came the construction of boarding schools, and the Phoenix Indian School is one such school. If you live in Phoenix, and you no doubt have driven or ridden on Indian School Road, it extends 40 miles in either direction and is a very popular street. But that's named after the Phoenix Indian School, which was built in 1891. It stands over on Central Avenue and Indian School Road. And that place was a place of cultural assimilation for our Native American youth. So as time went on, the Phoenix Indian School slowly shifted from a site of cultural violence for Native American youth to a site of reclamation and cultural celebration.
In 1895, Dwight Hurd and his wife May would settle in Phoenix to enjoy the clean, healthy desert air, a prescribed remedy for May's tuberculosis.
Dwight Hurd was a major influence. He was a merchant and a businessman who opened several enterprises. He was responsible for huge cotton farms, citrus farms, employing many people in the area. He also started the Central Arizona Land Company, which was responsible for a lot of the development in Central and North Phoenix. As philanthropists, they cared a lot about the arts. They opened this amazing Hurd Museum that we're sitting in right now to honor the stories and the cultures of the Native American people of Arizona. And he also started the Arizona Republican, which is still in circulation today, and we all know it as the Arizona Republic.
The trajectory of metropolitan Phoenix was fundamentally altered by the military-industrial investments made during the Second World War.
Between 1910 and 1920, Phoenix surpassed Tucson to become the largest city in the state. predominantly because of the export of Pima cotton. Pima cotton was instrumental during the war for the production of rubber products, including tires.
And so both private industries such as Goodyear Tire Company as well as federal investments were brought into the Phoenix area to help increase and augment this production for wartime.
Prior to World War I, air travel was not the main form of travel across the country. Trains were. Union Station in Phoenix became a transcontinental hub of Southern Pacific and Santa Fe and helped develop the Southwest.
The ability of people to travel to Phoenix prior to the interwar period was relatively limited, but with the advent of the Transcontinental Railroad and putting Phoenix on that main line, it transformed the ability of people to get here, not just as workers, but also as investors and as tourists. And in doing so, created economic opportunities that previously had been unavailable. Union Station was the sky harbor of its day. Due to the demand for Pima cotton, thousands of migrants came to Arizona and the area surrounding Phoenix to work in the cotton industry. So not only did World War I lead to development of technology and manufacturing, but also advanced agriculture, which led to population growth. Segregation was the law of the land, but it was a law of choice. So during the early 20th century, cities had the capacity to decide how they would choose to segregate. That being said, within Phoenix, many private decisions were made to exclude people of color from access to public accommodations in the broader metropolitan area, especially in the realm of housing. So Van Buren Street was seen as a dividing line, whereas people of color, primarily African Americans, were not sold housing or allowed to rent housing north of that line. South of Van Buren is where you would largely find communities of color.
Due to their exclusion from the dominant market, people of color south of Van Buren were free to develop their own institutions to provide services to their community.
Winston Hackett, along with his wife Ara Hackett, developed the Booker T. Washington Memorial Hospital to serve communities of color that were excluded from the dominant healthcare system. This hospital was seen as one of the predominant hospitals for people of color in the early 20th century. It was known as a colored hospital, but Hackett would treat people of all backgrounds.
Ara Hackett was more than a wife. She was also a newspaper publisher. She and her husband developed one of the first Black newspapers in the state, not to mention the first Black newspaper developed and published by a Black woman.
There's Father Emmett McLaughlin. He helped create the St. Monica's Mission. St. Monica's Mission was in South Phoenix, and it was dedicated to serving communities that had been excluded or forgotten due to segregation. But out of St. Monica's Mission, he's able to develop one of the first integrated nursing programs west of the Mississippi, and eventually develops the Phoenix Memorial Hospital. George Washington Carver High School was originally known as the Colored High School for Phoenix. It was one of the premier institutions for secondary education, not just in the state, but across the region. Dozens of its graduates would go on to complete higher education across the country, and several of its alumni would eventually go on to provide leadership across the valley and the state. Most prominently, Calvin Good, who served as a councilman in the city of Phoenix for more than 2 decades.
The Great Depression of 1929 impacted the nation, particularly those heavily invested in Wall Street. The city of Phoenix weathered the severity of this impact because they were primarily still an agricultural community in the 1920s. However, various federal departments stepped in to provide resources to Phoenix anyway, helping create some of the most enduring monuments.
So during the Great Depression, and moreover, with Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal, what you wind up seeing is an influx of federal money that was able to not just transform the valley, but really modernize it. So the WPA, the Works Progress Administration, and the Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC, these were some of the preeminent alphabet soup organizations that were developed during the time period. But they were able to help with projects across the valley, from South Mountain and the development of South Mountain Park to Papago Park, to the development of Encanto Park.
The time between World War I and World War II was a pivotal moment in the history and evolution of the city of Phoenix. What started as an agricultural hub in the desert grew into a modern urban empire of manufacturing, construction, and an unstoppable entrepreneurial spirit.
And at one point, Maryvale was growing so fast that John F. Long was selling 125 new homes per week. The building boom was on. Phoenix grew in the 1950s both in population and size. One of the first factors was the military personnel that were training at our air bases during World War II. There was a big influx of population due to the military coming onto our air bases. At the onset of the war, our Senator Carl Hayden convinced the War Department that all the open vacant land around the city of Phoenix would be excellent locations for air training facilities. And that brought scientists and engineers and other technology professionals to the valley.
By 1963, the electronics and manufacturing industries brought in $435 million a year, and agriculture, for the first time ever, was surpassed as a major source of revenue. These new residents of Phoenix faced the same challenges of living in the heat of the desert as the locals did. Prior to air conditioning, people survived the desert heat by sleeping outside, soaking bed sheets in water, and generally praying for a breeze.
Another factor was the advent of affordable air conditioning. People got used to air conditioning in movie theaters and hotels and retail businesses, and it was becoming affordable to get in their homes, making it more attractive to live in this hot, dry climate. Well, with all the people moving to Phoenix in the 1950s, they all needed places to live, and so the building boom was on. Some of our most significant developers were Del Webb. He developed Sun City, which was the first self-contained retirement community in the state. A couple of other major builders of the era, John Hall, Hallcraft Homes, Ralph Staggs, Staggs Built Homes. But probably the most notable builder of the era was John F. Long, the developer of Maryvale, our state's first planned community. It was named after his wife, Mary, on land that was given to them by her farming family, the Talmashoffs. Tourism increased dramatically in Phoenix mid-century. Airline travel was increasing, Union Station had daily train travel, the Greyhound bus depot downtown was busy, and of course Americans were traveling by car. We got our first freeway in Phoenix in 1950. The Black Canyon Freeway, or the I-17, opened. But in those days, the road to Phoenix, as it was called, was Van Buren Street.
Throughout the 60s, Van Buren was referred to as Motel Alley. Over 100 motels, hotels, motor courts, and motor inns lined both sides of the street.
In 1958, 3 million tourists visited the state of Arizona, and by the end of the 1950s, Arizona saw $125 million a year in revenue from tourism. By the mid-century, air travel had increased so much that Sky Harbor opened Terminal 1 in 1952 to accommodate all the travelers. It was built for $835,000, and it was considered state-of-the-art for an airport terminal in its day.
By the end of the 1950s, Terminal 1 could no longer accommodate all of the passengers traveling through Sky Harbor. And so, in 1962, Terminal 2 opened. The same year, the airport's annual traffic topped 1 million passengers for the first time.
Terminal 2 was iconic in that it was known for its rooftop viewing platform, but it was also known for the beautiful Phoenix bird mural that graced the walls in the waiting area of Terminal 2, painted by artist Paul Coates.
As Sky Harbor continues to be one of the busiest airports in the world, and the city of Phoenix one of the most visited, the 1950s can be seen as the era of the rise of modern Phoenix.
It's a sort of new economy that begins to emerge after World War II in the context of the Cold War. It's that information economy that is so vital to what we're doing now. The story of manufacturing in Phoenix is really hidden by our state seal. You know, we talk about the 5 C's. 4 of them are copper, cattle, citrus, and cotton, all of which are extractive industries. They're not about making new things. And they reflect Phoenix's history before World War II. After World War II, that really began to change in some fundamental ways. During the Cold War, city leaders really promoted manufacturing. Aerospace and technology emerged as key drivers in the economy in the 1950s and 60s. And that sees this incredible growth here in Phoenix in the technology sector. And so for the very first time, Phoenix is doing this kind of work that's at the leading edge of the economy. By the 1970s, it's an important but modest part of the economy. And now we are the 8th leading industrial manufacturing center. And so when you look out over the city now, beyond me, you see a bunch of things, features in the landscape that tell the story of the creation of that infrastructure that is largely, or at least partly, tied to manufacturing. You see waves and waves of housing off in the distance. You see a downtown of office towers there in Midtown. And you see over my left shoulder, perhaps, Arizona State University. All 3 of those represent aspects of both the diversification of the economy, but the need to build an infrastructure to drive manufacturing. ASU, because you need an educated workforce. Housing, because people need somewhere to live. And those office towers become the home for corporate headquarters, but also office workers and service workers that begin to come in larger numbers.
In 1956, the National Highway Defense Act determined that interstate highways needed to be built between cities as part of the broader Cold War effort.
So in the 50s, we begin to get the early freeways, and those allow the city to expand outward in a relatively inexpensive way, creating this kind of vast suburban megalopolis that supports the center city, that supports this diversifying economy. We hear maybe the cranes in the background. We see them for sure. We hear emergency vehicles because of the morning commute. It is part of what we know to be a vibrant city, right? And we don't mostly notice that in our daily lives, but those sounds tell us a city is growing.
As the freeways helped expand development further from Phoenix proper, the light rail was developed as a way of bringing people back. The light rail began operations in 2008 and as of today continues to expand and grow.
So in the last few years, we've seen the emergence of a light rail here in Phoenix. But the light rail will help bring people back to that civic center. And that kind of movement of people in and out of a downtown, in and around it, is really important to businesses big and small. Phoenix is this incredibly diverse community, economically diverse, ethnically and demographically diverse, but it has this extraordinary energy that you don't see in many American places. To me, a place like Phoenix with its diverse voices debating the future is the future of American cities. I would say that Phoenix tells us about what America will be and can be.
The city of Phoenix's origins began with an ancient civilization flourishing around an advanced water delivery system, literally laying the groundwork for an agricultural outpost in the 1800s. At one time overshadowed by Prescott and Tucson, Phoenix now holds the title of the capital of Arizona and one of the major cities in the United States.